All right, well, we're 2 minutes in, and I think we'll just go ahead and kick it off. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for NSC's second webinar in our Summit Sequel series. My name is Lindsey Reichlin Cruse, and I'm a senior fellow for post-secondary education at the National Skills Coalition. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, NSC is a national nonprofit organization fighting for inclusive, high-quality skills training so people have better access to a better life and local businesses see sustained growth. We engage in analysis and technical assistance, organizing, advocacy, and communications to improve state and federal skills policies. And our Summit Sequels are a series of virtual events that continue the conversation from our annual Skills Summit about federal and state skills policies that can contribute to an inclusive economic recovery. This is the second sequel in our 6-part series, and we really hope you can join us for the next one, which is going to be on June 7th, and it will focus on opportunities to leverage federal investments to expand equitable access to infrastructure careers. So you can register for that via the link that's going to be dropped in the chat. And of course, don't forget to save the date for our annual Skills Summit, which will be next year, May 1st through 3rd in Washington, D.C. So today, I'm really honored to introduce 3 expert panelists and NSC partners who are joining us to talk about how to increase the affordability of high-quality skills training. So first, I'll introduce Dr. Kenyatta Lovett, who is the Managing Director for Higher Education at Educate Texas, an initiative of the Communities Foundations of Texas. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Deputy Commissioner Deniece Thomas with the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Dr. Girard Melancon, who is the CEO and founder of Durango Works, former Vice Chancellor for Workforce Solutions at Baton Rouge Community College, and a current NSC board member. So our panelists will have a chance in the discussion to share more with us about their background and their work. But before we jump into the panel, I just want to spend a few moments grounding us in some context for today's conversation. So we are slowly emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, and many people continue to look for opportunities that will help them recover from work disruptions from the past 2 years, and that will also help them establish lasting financial stability. For people who are interested in pursuing education and training that can open doors to good jobs, short-term skills training programs can offer a route to increased employment and improved earnings more quickly than traditional degree programs. Yet many short-term programs which confer non-degree credentials are not eligible for federal or state grant aid. Combined with the cost of non-tuition expenses such as food, housing, childcare, transportation, and other basic needs, this lack of debt-free financial assistance for short-term training can put it out of reach for many adults. The absence of financial support for non-degree credentials also compounds structural barriers facing many adults and workers, especially Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people, whose ability to pursue higher education is inhibited by historical and ongoing racial discrimination, the racial wealth gap, and the disproportionate harm experienced from COVID and the recession. So increasingly, to address some of these issues, local, state, and national policymakers are seeking opportunities to provide financial assistance to support the pursuit of skills training, encourage positive outcomes for skills training participants, and meet employers' needs. And to support these efforts, NSC has been working with a number of states to develop and implement quality assurance frameworks that are supported by robust data to ensure that policy and investments, such as investments in financial aid for non-degree credentials, lead to equitable outcomes for learners. We're also working to understand the policy and funding strategies that can support enhanced financial assistance for adults interested in high-quality skills training. This work has highlighted a few themes that seem important for our conversation today, and I'm sure we'll hear more about, such as the opportunity to leverage and braid federal and state funding, including state programs for financial aid and college promise programs, as well as federal dollars from programs like the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, or the Supplemental Assistance Program, Education and Training, or SNAP-ENT. We also hear consistently about the importance of building partnerships across systems, as well as with community stakeholders and employers, to ensure sustainability of these opportunities and to meet learners' holistic needs. And perhaps most important is intentionally centering the realities and experiences of working and adult learners in our design and implementation of policy and practice. So I'm really excited that our panelists have joined us today, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts about how to sustainably and responsibly expand the affordability of quality skills training. As questions arise for you throughout this conversation, please share those with us by clicking and adding them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And we'll leave time for audience questions towards the end of our conversation. So with that, let's just jump into the conversation right now. So welcome again, Kenyatta, Deniece, and Girard. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start by having us address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and continuing economic roller coaster that we're on, something that the three of you, really identified as a pertinent, pressing issue for all of us and the learners we're working to impact. The last 2 years have really exposed and exacerbated the stark disparities across US communities and displayed the structural deficiencies in our various education, workforce, and social support systems. Yet this moment has also created new and necessary opportunities for innovation. So I'm hoping you can share with us from your perspectives in higher education and workforce development, as well as among employers, the changes that you've seen around post-secondary access and affordability, and how these changes should be informing how we think about policy and practice moving forward. So I'm gonna let Kenyatta go first, and then we can hear from Deniece and Girard. Oh, Kenyatta, you gotta unmute.
You would think after 2 years. But sure, thank you, Lindsey, and thank you all for allowing me to be on this panel. And as you bring up a very good point about the impact of COVID-19 and our focus on higher education. The bright spots have really been centered on a few things. One, the learn and earn model is proving to be a very viable option for so many across America who, unfortunately, during COVID-19 had to make the hard choice between college or career. And the ability to merge those two together really creates an opportunity for us to get those underrepresented and underserved citizens into pipelines to viable pathways that they didn't have before. So that was one part of innovation that I definitely have seen in Texas and in Tennessee and across the nation that's growing, that it really has ramped up since COVID-19. The other one I'd say in the higher ed space is on the conversation of micro-credentials. And while it may be controversial for a lot of institutions, we have seen proven models out there where employers are engaged, the workforce system is engaged. I mean, if you can get citizens to experience those post-secondary opportunities that are short-term, cost-effective, and are aligned to careers that they can land quickly, we're seeing that as a growing option that people are choosing moving forward. The question now, and going back to short-term Pell and other conversations, is how do we leverage that from COVID-19 and build that into the larger framework of higher education so that these pathways are successful, whether you want to go 4 years to get a bachelor's or you want to take your time at 4 to 6 months at a time. So our work at Educate Texas has been centered around that, but definitely the conversations around Texas have been centered around that also, is how do we make good in re-engaging those who have unfortunately been damaged from the disruptions caused by COVID-19.
Yeah, and Lindsey, I would just say in the workforce development space, we certainly saw the issues that occurred sort of coming into the pandemic and still in it, depending on the perspective, the widening skill gap for those that were low skilled or no skill were immensely impacted by the effects of the pandemic. A lot of those, particularly in the service industry, we saw folks that were traditionally minorities that were disrupted, that had job loss, collecting unemployment benefits, and really looking for ways to reconnect, to gain skills and credentials they need to go into those industries that were experiencing a high level of growth. And so from the workforce development side, the highlights have been really growing the ecosystem around the public workforce space to bring in partners that can really serve on a continuum and not have disparate programs and services that often lead to really disconnected resources for individuals. So really the workforce playing a heightened role in bringing things together in one place, in one space. And so partnerships of non-traditional partners, even in workforce that we hadn't seen at the table, are starting to emerge because there's a general understanding that those folks that were disconnected that really need to upskill or reskill really need all of us at the table to offer those resources that are often needed. And so, we certainly see that in Tennessee. I don't think we're unique in that. I think across the country, we're seeing partnerships really emerge that highlight the need for us to continue to build out platforms and foundational opportunities for folks that are oftentimes not necessarily a part of that. And because WIOA is really focused on serving priority populations, it's a perfect blend to start to get these folks ready and in the chute for programs that are emerging across the country in higher education. And so we hope that that's a model that will continue to grow and expand as this conversation continues.
Oh, good point, Deputy Commissioner Thomas. And what I've experienced from the employer side, right now, through COVID, obviously the service sector, even in Louisiana where I am now, the service sector took a hit. New Orleans, everything else, hospitality hit. But other areas kind of picked up, like in healthcare. And what that had provided, at least through a community college standpoint, healthcare providers are they're cutthroat competitive. They don't play well in the sandbox prior to COVID, but when COVID hit, they realized the race for talent had to be looked at different, and it had to be done through a collective strategy. And I've seen a lot of community colleges pull together the healthcare sector stronger to actually build a talent pipeline of a lot of those displaced workers. And that's why it's been kind of hard to get more people to go back into the service sector, because you could go into allied healthcare with short-term training. And also the healthcare sector got more savvy on, let's still hire first, but let's enroll them in a CMA program or phlebotomy program, but they're going to be an Ochsner employee at that same time. So the earn and learn model in the healthcare sector really built up. The other issue that I've kind of experienced in working with community colleges, kind of helping to think through this, is that a lot of money was thrown out there for some training. The first round of relief money, adult learner short-term training wasn't even part of the conversation. So I really applaud National Skills Coalitions, others to help the federal government correct that wrong in the other rounds of funding for short-term training. But now when things are coming back online, the good job is still the hire first, train later. And a lot of times that's the kind of friends and family staffing model. So if a company wasn't that diverse going into COVID beforehand, they're not coming out being diverse after COVID, because it's still the friends and families who to get in there. But that plays a very strategic role for community college to work with those employers and kind of be part of, hey, we'll recruit in the community, BIPOC communities for you. Let's help screen, pre-select them to just get them working for you. And then let's talk about training them as incumbent workers once things settle down. But that has opens up some new conversations on that hire first, train later conversation. And COVID has provided more opportunities for that. But these community colleges have to be very intentional with those employers. Okay, we know we're not telling them, hey, come spend 16 weeks of training first, and then we send them to you. You need somebody now, but let's hire somebody now and let's train them later. But consider us as a partner in that conversation. And I think COVID has brought some good strategies about that. And that's going to help us moving forward with automation and some other struggles in our future.
Yeah, thank y'all for those points. And, something that strikes me when you're talking about hire first, train later, there's also a need among adults and families to get a good job quickly because they've got mouths to feed. They've got to put food on the table. They've got families to care for. And that is a real reality that always existed and has continued to just get worse as we have seen the effects of the pandemic kind of really come to a height. So thinking about adult learners, adult workers in this conversation, making training more affordable, what does it mean to center adult learners and their realities in these conversations? And what are the implications for really achieving an inclusive economic recovery, especially for those, dislocated workers of color who really have experienced the greatest harm. I know, we all talked about this when we prep for this conversation. Does anybody want to kick it off in particular? Deniece, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, so I'll say, Lindsey, first and foremost, I think it's important to understand that even though, folks were working and things appeared to be good on the surface, right? Low unemployment, if you turn that number upside down, you still saw a lot of individuals, particularly those of color, that were unemployed or in jobs that were low skill, that were not family sustaining wages. And so in a lot of ways, COVID just further exposed the gaps that were already there. And so now the remedy around trying to get folks upskilled and returning back to spaces where they can get short-term training, whether that's in a higher education setting or with an employer, whatever it may be, the challenge is how to get those folks really connected, understanding that they have real immediate needs, right? I need to keep food on the table. I have children to take care of. And, unfortunately, it's been an either or for a lot of those folks. And now we're saying those two things can happen together, right? By having structures that support that encourage that. And so for us, it's how do you then look at certain populations and provide access to training where they are. We often use the adage, we meet people where they are, and I would say we meet people where we think they should be. And that often creates gaps. So if someone is working at a job, if they return to the service industry, for example, we're not picking on the service industry, but we know that was a very hard hit area. I can work the drive-through, but I can still learn while I'm there. I can upskill, and it doesn't always have to be in a very formal setting. I think Dr. Lovett exposed micro-credentials, right? That it can be that I'm sort of on this ladder and I keep going up or wrong, because each opportunity I have to do that increases my ability to earn more, to learn more, and to be exposed into learning and have opportunities. In Tennessee, we saw a boom with apprenticeship. So when everything else was really in flux, apprenticeship just steadily inclined. Why? Because people could learn, and they were really being incentivized for learning by earning while they do it. And so the key is, and I could not agree with Girard more, is to hire first and then train folks that are already very capable, instead of having them on the sidelines, disconnected from the economy, waiting for them to get these skills. It's bringing them in and allowing an opportunity for that economic mobility, which is what we all hope will happen. And so in our space here in Tennessee, that's what we're hoping to do. And a lot of it too is bringing those resources forward. Information is still very powerful in helping people to understand here is a path to getting stackable credentials, and here are resources to meet you at each point of need. There have been disparate programs for a lot of years, and folks have had a hard time really understanding how all of this works together to benefit them. So I also think, resource sharing, resource allocation, all those things are very important in helping folks get started in that journey.
And I'll add, it's interesting in Texas, the degree attainment goal was titled 60 by 30 Texas, 30 by 60 Texas. Let me mess that up, but it was essentially 60% of adults need to have 25 through 34 need to have some level of degree or credential. Since COVID-19, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board has changed that to building a talent strong Texas. And what's in this new plan, it still has the degree attainment goal of 60%, but more important, now there's a focus on all adults, and there's also a focus on credentials of value, which shows that what happened during COVID-19 has inspired the state to rethink how they're approaching degree attainment. But one thing that I definitely learned in Tennessee, and also under the leadership of Deputy Commissioner Thomas, one, in Tennessee, you have Tennessee Reconnect for adults. So adults can go to community college for free in Tennessee, but what we learned, it's more than just tuition. Actually, tuition is just one part of it. And this is what I've really learned that's made a difference across, the nation when you have strategies that work. It's one, how do you lower the transactional cost for adults to engage in these opportunities? Sometimes we make them so cumbersome that, that's not worth the effort for them. The other one is, and I've been preaching about this a little lately, is we built linear solutions for nonlinear realities. And so, adults, all of us will have to come on and off the education and career and training ramp throughout our lives just to have the skills necessary to be competitive in the marketplace. If our systems aren't designed for that, it limits the ability for people to engage and be part of that. So, these things I've learned, and I could say definitely with Deputy Commissioner Thomas, trying to figure out ways to merge the workforce system with higher education and trying to figure out ways to align funding is the solution that makes the system work more efficiently and effectively. But you have to have buy-in from communities, you have to have buy-in from the state. But I think what's been promising in Texas is at least that plan now acknowledges that we need to focus on adults, and we also need to think about those training activities, those credentials that are not counted, that are very relevant in the system.
And real quick, Dr. Lovett, I concur with definitely you and Deputy Commissioner Thomas. I think another thing to add to it, I think the role of intermediaries played out. If that intermediary role is done at the community college or through a progressive community organization or through a faith-based organization or whatever, a private sector, the holistic of working with adults is kind of being realized through training providers and so forth, and wrapping around those services like evening childcare and for people to go into shift work and all that. So I think those type of supports that are being played out, or blended learning skill training programs, so ESL or somebody struggling with basic skills deficiency, have been expanded and also invested in with some of these federal dollars and state and local dollars too. So I think the holistic view of training adults, similar to training in a foster care, youth aging out foster care, has come more into that system when, like you said, Dr. Lovett, adults are just not 18-year-olds with liabilities, just they have real pressures and time pressures and financial pressures and life pressures that I think institutions are figuring out, not to lower the bar, but kind of helping people to get up above those credentialing bars and licensing and so forth moving forward. So that's very exciting that I've experienced and see that growing moving forward.
Yeah, all of your comments landed with me. I liked linear solutions for nonlinear realities. That's a pretty powerful statement. And it also landed with me, Kenyatta, when you said then how important it is to merge and align funding and relationships across workforce and higher education, but that we need buy-in to do that. And I'd love to hear from all three of you about, are there examples that are emerging of how you're doing this? I know in Tennessee this is happening as a practice, but where are you seeing this working? Where are the lessons that you're learning, and where is the buy-in? Whose buy-in do we need to make that happen? I'll leave that open to whoever wants to go in first.
I'll jump in. I think Tennessee Reconnect is probably widely known to a lot of folks, which is obviously a program that's built for adult learners that are looking to go back and either complete an associate's degree or technical degree, or those who are just starting out and decide that they want to be lifelong learners and they want to get into a certain sector to get training. But I think the part that's not as widely known is the partnership between the Tennessee Reconnect program and the workforce system. Early into this program, it was the adoption of the ambassador model, where there were Reconnect ambassadors all across the state that can really help carry that message to get the word out to folks and give people really a chance to have a warm handoff and not just say, here's this bright, shiny new program, and folks are kind of left to their own vices to figure out how to maneuver it. And so our American Job Centers under the public workforce system were the first to adopt the ambassador program to say, hey, there is truly no wrong door. So if you step inside an American Job Center, we will be a connection point to the Tennessee Reconnect program. And so really moving that forward with COVID, one of the things we saw was that, as people experienced job disruption, the number of folks that were collecting unemployment benefits in our state. And so we partnered with the Tennessee Reconnect, the Tennessee Higher Education Commissioner who oversees the Reconnect program, to say, how do we get displaced workers back into the chute for short-term training? And so we partnered with the Higher Education Commission to share what had never been shared before in our state, because there was this belief that if you share unemployment data, somebody's going to, be in Fort Leavenworth, which is not true, because we have all these long-standing notions of why we can't do certain things, not understanding the impact that it has on our citizens. And so we partnered with them after the lawyers had their part. And we pitched this to our governor and said, look, here's a perfect opportunity to have individuals, potential adult learners who really need this, so that those who are at most vulnerable to job loss again can stabilize themselves in this economy. And so we shared with our Reconnect partners over 500,000 records of claimants to say, here are folks that do not have a technical degree or an associate's degree who are perfect for Tennessee Reconnect, because the time to really pay attention to these folks is not after they exhausted benefits and all these federal programs have gone away, but let's rehab their skills while they're already in one of our programs. And so that program was largely successful, and really we've kind of talked about that across the country, but it's just one example of how we can take it further to really be proactive in our service and not just wait for people to come to us, but really reach out and say, here's a pathway. And what we did, because we know a lot of folks are like, wait a minute, now I'm collecting unemployment and I got a job search. So we said, listen, if you're under the Tennessee Reconnect program, you satisfied your job search requirement. So we're not putting extra restraints and barriers on people to take advantage of these programs. And so, that's one that we always say, at least it was one evidence-based approach, and we hope that that's just one of many that we can do to help people take advantage of these opportunities.
And one thing I would like to plug National Skills Coalition. This has been an issue. Affordability for adult learners has been top of mind for me since like 2006. And then really National Skills Coalition has always kind of been the champion. I call them the voice for the voiceless in the higher ed institute. Nobody was really talking about funding for adult learners beyond just change of WIA to WIOA, some eligibility terms in that space. But when National Skills Coalition was partnering or kind of leading the way, dealing with short-term Pell and getting short-term Pell passed, and still working on that legislation in many forms of fashion. States have responded, and it's been very good to see out of that federal advocacy how states have kind of filled the gap. And even in Louisiana, we finally got a MJ Foster program for adult learners passed last session, and it's going to be implemented this year. I would say 5 years ago, that wasn't part of the conversation. And now there's legislation being passed. State dollars are putting money behind that. And I think COVID has really helped us look at that. When a third of your workforce was paralyzed, what a third of your workforce gone, you can't work. There's no sector for that. Is helping us develop strategies. We all know automation's around the corner, and just-in-time staffing models are still there in all good jobs. It's kind of helping us tool up and think through policy, but implementation at the local level of how to prevent that and kind of keep learners moving forward.
And I'll say in Texas, it has started with a lot of regional leadership, and I think all will agree that you have to have someone at the lead that's willing to play with other partners to make this collaboration work. And I think about Amarillo College and the leadership they've had in supportive services and leading new models, or Dallas College and their work with the K-12 system, or even Austin Community College and how they've been nimble enough to keep up with the changing economy in Austin, or South Texas, which has a totally different framework, and thinking about how they can use short-term credentials to create pathways, or the work of Peter Beard and the Greater Houston Partnership. They're all great examples across the state. But one thing that's been very promising, and the commenting period just closed yesterday, has been that there's a tri-agency recommendation for a collaborative, the tri-agency initiative, which has the Texas Education Agency, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the Texas Workforce Commission. They put out recommendations on how they want the state to have guidance on collaboration, which is a great body of work that aligns all of it and makes it happen. Now you need to see the counties, the communities coming together to support that to get at scale, because all the examples I mentioned, whether it's Amarillo or Austin Community College, we're still missing scale. We have the leaders for now, but you're not guaranteed that long term unless there's a larger framework there. I'll say the one that's been the most promising to get at scale has been what San Antonio is doing through San Antonio Ready to Work, where the citizens in San Antonio in 2020 voted to raise taxes for a workforce development fund. Under the leadership of Mike Ramsey, in collaboration with Chancellor Mike Flores at the Alamo College District, and in collaboration with Adrian Lopez, who's at Alamo Workforce Solutions, they're trying to figure out how this $200+ million fund can bring this collaboration to scale to be able to help out. But again, it comes down to leadership really starting that off of saying, hey, everyone, we've got to start working together. We've got to be smarter about the work. Definitely, Deputy Commissioner Thomas, we saw that with the leadership of the commissioner at the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development and Jeff McCord and the governor's office, that when you have one that's willing to be quarterback and play, friendly with all other agencies and all other partners, you can build that framework to happen. But again, it starts with leadership, and then hopefully you can hard bake it in with some good policies and some good recommendations and also some good strategies.
Yeah, all those examples are really exciting. And I'm wondering, not all programs can be the New Mexico Promise program first dollar, there are one or two other, examples that really lean into the supportive services aspect. We know that for adult workers, learners, that those are essential, and you've all spoken to that. And I'm, thinking about this kind of broader conception of affordability. Where are you seeing promising models, and what examples from your work how are you approaching this when it comes to kind of supporting both the financial assistance when it comes to paying for tuition and fees, but also beyond? And we've spoken already about what some of those supportive services look like, but how do you make them happen? Childcare is one that I've worked a lot on in my career, and it's both expensive to provide and short in supply. And so thinking about how to make that work and across systems, across partners and relationships. Does anything come to mind that you think others, we can be learning from?
Let me just jump in a little bit on this, and it's more of, I think some of the models that Dr. Lovett just brought up are very promising, and really it was one, leadership, and two, buy-in from the community to provide that base support. I really think we always talked about we can provide access through free tuition, but they have to have access to high quality, and then that institution has to have a base funding underwritten by taxpayers in some form or fashion, and to have that high quality instructor, labs, equipment, and to help facilitate their employer partners. Employers they're doing a lot. They're giving equipment, they're leasing stuff for community colleges, they're doing all types of stuff, but there still needs to be that base funding set in place and buy-in into that, at least as a training provider and a holistic service that we talked about before, that's still needed. And then also with adult learners, colleges are still kind of hitting their head against the wall on how they're scored, either through iPads, National Student Clearinghouse, because you're talking about less than part-time adult learners. And when you look at the IPEDS report, they're nowhere there. And then, the local paper is going to run your enrollments down of your, you could be going through the roof with adult learners, but they're less than part-time, less than full-time work students. And that may take a hit. It's not a zero-sum game, but if you look at your fall enrollment for your full-time students, they're not, the college is not, one, they're not being funded through state formula that way, and two, they're not being recognized. So there's a couple of barriers, base funding, and how colleges are being rewarded for doing good work for adult learners. And so those are a couple of things just for us to figure it out, and then all of that will build a case for funding and support for that community college.
Yeah, and I'll add, and I definitely learned from the workforce system side from Deputy Commissioner Thomas, and I definitely saw it in higher education. Unfortunately, you see a lot of these examples, Lindsey, at the local level where the communities have chipped in to cover that cost, or there's a philanthropic leader in the community that wants to see that happen in their community. But at scale or across the state, that can be challenging. And I think the unfortunate part is, and definitely Deputy Commissioner Thomas, let me know what you think on the workforce system. And you just mentioned it, Girard, the outcomes that are relevant to keeping those grants or the reporting that's required to stay alive or thriving sometimes run counter to what leaders need to do to have a healthy, successful workforce system. I definitely have seen it here in Texas. We're now revisiting the community college financial model. And what you see is a lot of our presidents and chancellors are doing innovative work in workforce development at a loss, because they're not necessarily incentivized or paid to do that. And so that's the part where I think if we want to innovate in policy, if we want to innovate programmatically, we have to look at those leaders who are exemplars out there and understand, are you doing this because this is what you believe needs to happen in the system? And are we helping you from our incentives or our funding? Or are you doing it and we're actually supporting that behavior as well? And so, the question always that we have at Educate Texas is, what behaviors are you trying to incent and what behaviors are you trying to disincent to have that system that you need? But unfortunately, sometimes leaders are doing this actually at a loss because they know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I agree with you both. I think that's very important. We certainly see this on the workforce side. There are a myriad of opportunities with the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. The challenge comes with it doesn't get counted or measured. And there's a great need for individuals to be served, but do they fit the criteria that I'm going to be scored on? And so oftentimes we are in a position where, do we go against the grain and serve for goodness sake, or do you run the risk of not meeting compliance? And so those are some of the things that we really have to start to really lift voice and bring attention to, because systematically there are structures in place that really inhibit a lot of the throughput from agencies to agencies or program to program, which a lot of our citizens so desperately need. And a lot of that is based in design. And I would say even on the workforce side, whereas there's a lot of good opportunity, there are a lot of archaic thinking still baked into the way the public workforce funding and even some of the policy around WIOA is structured. And so in order to really start to see this occur at a level where it's not an exception, but it's the rule, we really have to dive into some policy considerations and think about how we can make more opportunities. But as a bright spot, what really comes to mind is, Tennessee, how we utilize the SNAP Employment and Training Program. That's under the authority of our Human Services Agency, but our department implements that program in partnership with them. And so at a lot of the institutions, we know there are students that are SNAP eligible. And so with that, we're able to really, through relationship with the institutions, identify those students so that we can provide some of the supports that they need. So we don't have students that go almost the entire semester without textbooks or things that we know is so critical to their ability to not just be in the seat, but to be a completer. And so programs like that, we try to continue to be innovative and creative and helping folks understand some of the positive rewards that can come from making those connections. And I couldn't agree with Kenyatta more in that we have a lot of institutions where the leadership is so committed to making sure that they provide the best possible space for their adult learners, whether that's physically or with, financially. And so we really, it's a shame if we don't really leverage that and applaud that and not penalize folks for doing good work. And so I think that's something that we also need to consider and work through. Wish I had a better answer right now, but that's kind of where we are, Lindsey.
Hey, Deniece and Girard, though, and you helped me with this, Deniece. I would love to see a study on waivers and the outcomes from all the waivers, not just for WIOA, but for Perkins, and even there's probably some waivers in there around SAGs, to see what those outcomes look like, and are we using those waivers to inform and advance policy? Because those are the ones where people who want to lead push the envelope a little bit and say, hey, U.S. Department of Labor, can you give me a little grace? I think we have something here. Can we try it out? And I just wonder if there's some research to see all the waivers that have been implemented, what has been the difference? And if there is a difference, how can we make that, totally a law?
Right. And Dr. Love, I agree. And also we need to challenge the waivers to make the programs easier. So for one time, we just passed, we asked for a waiver to go back to 50-50 out of school youth money. Instead of working creatively and strategically to be more strategic for out of school youth with WIOA funding. They're trying to make it easier and go back. And I've seen some of the adult money. I saw some legislation, some state spent all their time trying to pass for adult funding for adult learners. And now they said, well, it was like 24 and on up. And now they said, well, can we reduce it? Can we bring it back to 18? I'm like, you don't have a limited pot of money. You just got the program passed. we need to roll our sleeves up and figure what the gap is for the adult learners. And so that's one thing on the waivers. I think we need to support those who are trying to do innovative work and add more flexibility to service the more disconnected of our populations, and incentivize them and not ding them because if they don't meet the negotiated performance measures, because they're actually trying, instead of asking, hey, can we do the easier work to serve X population, because it's just a lot easier to find them or service that population.
Yeah, I would, Kenyatta, you're speaking my language. I would love to see that. It's no secret. I know you know this. We've asked for waivers, some that we hoped would be approved and some that we knew would be approved. It was important just to go on record, right? And so, if we could have a system that served to need and not performance, I think we could start to see and really fund a lot more ingenious design that we're seeing start to pop up. And specifically around, some of the barriers that we see. And again, this is not an indictment on any program or any federal agency. I think we're all trying to, quite frankly, figure it out as we go along. We're seeing some shifting in workforce that we've not seen for a lifetime. It's a very fluid market. And so we're all trying to figure out how do we best serve the citizens in our respective states. But I do think there has to be some allowance. I always tell folks we forget about the innovation that's in WIO. There has to be some investment into innovation and really allow us to try this, because with human beings and all the changing nature of what's going on, it's not that exact. And we have to be able to start to meet some of the needs that we know specifically exist with adult learners, and even more specifically for those who traditionally have been underserved in these programs. And it's going to take a different approach. And those approaches can sometimes be costly. But we don't need to turn a blind eye to them. We need to figure out a way to really build on advancements that are already occurring across the country.
Thank you, all of you, for those thoughts. And I want to pick up on one piece that I think you all mentioned at some point earlier in the conversation, but also that resonates with me with regard to the outcomes and reporting conversation. What we measure and collect data on, we invest in and we pay attention to, and that comes, full circle for me when thinking about what these programs are doing for the learners and their outcomes in the labor market. And of course, that high quality provider and high quality equipment and everything that goes into providing training is essential to get employers, folks who have the skills they need to fill those jobs. But for people, when it comes to building that financial security, especially coming out of COVID, we have to make sure that these training programs are leading to good outcomes. So I'm wondering from all of your perspectives, thinking about accountability levers and how data and transparency and outcomes and reporting can come into how we think about these investments and these different approaches to making skills training work for adult learners. What are you seeing? Where do you see, stackability, credit for prior learning coming to play in a way that's really working for folks? I'm going to start with you, Kenyatta, because I know this is something you'd raised when we chatted before.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was fortunate to just have a meeting with Chairman Brian Daniel, who's over the Texas Workforce Commission. And we were talking specifically about stackable credentials and how if we don't take this moment to really think about how it transforms the higher education and workforce game, we're losing a lot of momentum. There are some good examples of, I'll use the University of North Texas, the Google IT certifications that have been growing since COVID-19, and Coursera and others are offering it. They're granting 13 credit hours towards a degree. I look at Alamo College District, they're taking some of these micro credentials, and instead of going through a long curriculum review process that may take years, they've got a pre-packaged set of courses that they can incorporate into a program that works really well for a lot of citizens. So stackable credentials, I think, in different areas across the nation are being used in some very good ways. But the most important piece of it is really about the employer and how the employer is recognizing it and how the employer is actually streamlining the hiring process that makes it easier for students or those in training programs to get into jobs. But I'd say at the end of the day, and I mentioned South Texas as well, college, what they're doing is they're looking at degrees and credentials that don't necessarily align. But they're connected. I mean, we love the LPN, the RN. I don't even want to call it a valley or a cliff or whatever, where you've majored in one thing, got a credential, but you can't get over that hump because the credits don't articulate. What they're doing is using micro-credentials to bust through that wall to make the pathway work. So what can we do in a short-term credential way where a student doesn't have to start all back over to get that degree? So there are examples of it, but I think once we get to a national conversation on, these types of programs are recognized and very viable in our workforce and our economy, and this should be part of the post-secondary ecosystem, I think then you'll give incentive to institutions who are threatened by those to realize that they've got an opportunity to be more efficient and more effective in their own community.
Yeah, I would just say, I think about someone who's working, for example, in a production environment, and they show up for work, they do what they're asked, raving reviews from their supervisor, but then they're asked to go in a classroom and learn the things that they're already doing every single day. I think we really have to give some thought to essentially what do we want an individual to be able to do versus what we want them to possess. I think that has to be a real conversation because we have people that can do a lot of this work with their eyes closed and they don't have necessarily certification. So it's not always you have to bring that to a post-secondary institution to begin your journey, but how can post-secondary think differently about how do we certify and credential what you already know? Because what we find in even individuals that we may say are low skill, they have more skills than meets the eye, but they've not been credentialed. So how do we look at rewarding people for the work experience that they've already had? Because employers, and I'm sure Girard can speak more to this, they're training every single day. They have their own learning institution inside of their walls. It shouldn't have to be duplicated, and particularly duplicated in costs that one has to invest to be able to get a credential, only to tell them they are now somehow miraculously able to do what they've been doing in some instances for years. I think that's something that we have to think about. It's almost ludicrous when you really articulate it in that way. So we really have to think about what is that meeting of the minds, that we don't tell people that somehow you're not able to have a viable career if you've not stepped on campus and walked through hallowed halls. I think we really have to think about folks that have been out there doing it and learning and developing and growing, and how can we start to credential and add value to that? Because I think that sets a precedent that would be healthy, particularly when we look at the gap we have right now with workforce needs. It could really accelerate some models between employers and those that are looking to upskill.
And I'll just quickly add, once again before, I think how, particularly community colleges, how they're being scored or meeting their performance measures and stuff like that with their state and their the funding formula. And I always say, I hate to say I'm jealous of Texas because I think Texas has proven they have a true community college because the community is actually funding that college. States like in others, like probably Tennessee and Louisiana, where, at one time we were receiving 70% of our funding off FTE. Now we're only receiving 30% of that funding off FTE, and 70% is being made up by tuition and fees. We're basically getting pushed forward to a private school. And then we bring in adult learners where you're not part of the FTE funding formula for the colleges. You're very much, especially these non-accredited corporate college workforce units, you're very much a standalone business inside that operation. And so with all that innovative work that's happening, it's got to be recognized through accreditation and through the states or local, if you get ad valorem millage funding formula, so to help incentivize those leaders to give more emphasis on there. And so you're only going to do what you get counted for in many cases, unless you have a lot of support externally. And then also part of that mix, I think that's going to help drive innovation. I see GM just put in the chat. There's a lot of progressive nonprofits out there to leverage and partner with to help, that needs to be part of that conversation too. And they're doing some great innovative work for employers and with community colleges and with on the private side, some good privates, not the predatory ones. But so yes, I just want to add that real quick.
Well, we have a couple of questions, it looks like, in the Q&A, and if anybody has others, please add them now. We can let the audience chime in here a little bit. It looks like we have a couple of kind of specific questions about Tennessee, Deniece. So the first is someone says that their local job center is going to be closing, but they want to be able to help people access services from Tennessee Reconnect. And this is coming from a librarian. So kind of opportunities to plug into that model you were describing where, I forget what you called it, the ambassador model, I think. And then also there's a question around how Tennessee is working with SNAP E&T funding, whether that's the credit program side or if that includes non-credit programming. So why don't we just start there with those two specific questions. I gotta unmute. End of the day, it happens.
I think I need short-term training on getting the mute button off. I haven't learned in 2 years. I could have an associate's in unmuting by now. But as far as the area of the state where it's closing, there are no closures. I think some of our centers are becoming more specialized so that we can meet more specifically needs that individuals have. But again, all of our American Job Centers are connected, meaning that you can walk in any center. We also have a virtual American Job Center. Huge credit to Kenyatta. This was one of the things that was under his leadership that you can also tap into. So it doesn't have to be in a physical space. Tennessee is largely rural. So we understand there has to be connection points. And so feel free to really tn.gov. You can access all of there's a link there for the virtual website and we can connect with you. The second part is around the SNAP E&T funding. Tennessee has worked like other states across the country in the 50-50 partnership model, where we really partner with community-based organizations to leverage what are oftentimes not enough dollars in 100% SNAP funding. A lot of the programs are non-credit programs because the goal is to quickly have individuals train in short-term stackable credentials so that they can go to work and have wages that then can be increased over time through many of our programs. The goal ultimately is from the non-credit side is to also have these folks be co-enrolled with Title I so they can build on the training that they've had. And so we've been doing that for a number of years with SNAP E&T funding. We use intermediaries to make sure that it's connected and we have good partners that can offer training in a variety of sectors. And so again, on our website is a lot of information about how to get tapped into SNAP E&T programming, and our human services partners who we love is also there as well to help individuals who have more questions about that.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so we've got one question here about investments in adult basic education. This person says that the system has not yet received any direct COVID relief investments, something, Girard, that I think you were noting. And we know, adult learners need support from the system to be able to access and succeed in skills training. So do you see, any increased investment in the adult basic ed system in the coming future, or any opportunities to leverage funds for that system? Anyone, open to anyone?
As of right now, I think the need for adult basic ed is definitely there. I don't know of any federal legislation that has been pushed forward as hard as the short-term Pell. Dr. Lovett may know more on his side, but I think as we listen, Alvin Toffler is a futurist, talked about this. The future learner is the person who first can learn, unlearn, and then relearn information. And this is nothing new what we do, but the sad thing is the formula model has been, you learn something, we're done with you, you go figure it out on your own moving forward. But I think the conversation has changed once again with the impact of COVID. But before COVID, we had three recessions prior to that, especially if you're Black and brown, you never recovered from, and then COVID hit you. So you've been constantly trying to figure out with the limited skills of where can I find my next job? And that has kind of all caught up to us. And now we have bottlenecks in supply chains, and we don't have the mismatch of labor and all that stuff going on. And we are all kind of paralyzed in many aspects. And a lot of that has led to the labor cost has really increased a lot of the inflationary pressures that our employers are dealing with. So I think all forms of adults I think that conversation is growing. No matter if you have a college degree and you need to be retrained quickly into something else or something different, so you're still viable in the workforce, or if you don't have your high set, all of those individuals, I think, are going to be be advocating more forthright moving forward. And then hopefully, one thing as COVID has done in some cases is that we can respond to a crisis, even though we did respond as well in some cases as others. But I think as funding wise, you can mobilize. We had testing centers all over. We got vaccines. People were actually were being paid when they're being laid off. So there is, if there's the will, there is a way. And I think that's one thing that coming out of COVID, we can't see. We just got to advocate for that and give voice and models and talk about this like we're doing here in this panel.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I'll quickly say I'm not that I'm not concerned about that part of it, but I'm more concerned, really anxious about the high school graduating classes of 2020 and 2021. We're assuming that they went to work, but I guarantee you there's a huge majority of that group. We have no clue where they are. And how does that play out long-term for communities, for states, for this nation, when you think of the magnitude of the numbers of students who have just basically, we've lost them. Maybe they graduated from high school, maybe they didn't. They're not in college, they're not working, you can't find them there. What's going on with that population? And you can't really even consider them or treat them like opportunity youth. It has to be some much more comprehensive effort to be courageous and do the right thing by helping them understand that COVID-19 was rough and things fell through the cracks. Unfortunately, it wound up being people. And I think the numbers, when we see the numbers of where we just literally don't know where they are from 2 graduating high school classes, I think it would alarm everyone that we need a specialized program just for that to make things work.
And Lindsey, if I may, just real quickly, I'm also not aware of any investments in adult education specifically for that charge, but I will tell you, here in Tennessee, our integrated education and training programs have seen a jolt in adult education. We're partnering particularly with some of those Tennessee colleges of applied technology that also implement our adult education programs. So we're seeing structured programming, where, particularly in healthcare. And these programs are really important because they oftentimes can function as pre-apprenticeship models to get folks ready either for post-secondary or for work. And so there's not necessarily an investment, but there's ways to leverage some of the programs we're already seeing. And the last thing I'll say is that even dual enrollment with adult education students, we're having some of our students that are in adult education, but they're also enrolled in some of our colleges of applied technology diploma programs, which doesn't necessarily require them to have their HiSET. But because they're getting a taste of post-secondary, it opens up doors and trajectories for this population that otherwise may not be there.
Well, unfortunately, we are almost at time. I know that there are other questions in the chat, but we'll have to close it up here. I just want to thank all 3 of you so much for sharing your expertise and your insight with us, and just for taking the time out of your days to spend an hour with us. And thank you also for the work you're doing for adults and for workers to make post-secondary opportunities more accessible. And I appreciate all the attendees of our webinar today. Thank you for engaging with this discussion, and we really welcome you all to join the next Summit Sequel webinar. That'll be on June 7th. There should be a link in the chat to register, and you can see more about our Summit Sequels on our website, nationalskillscoalition.org. And again, don't forget to save the date for our Skills Summit next May 1st through 3rd in Washington, D.C. And with that, I will say goodbye and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you again.